This morning we're going to continue our series on names of God. This morning's message is on the name, the Ancient of Days. And that's the reason we're camping out in Daniel 7 is because that's the only time that God is called the Ancient of Days is in Daniel 7. And our title kind of explains what we'll be talking about this morning about it, is that the Ancient of Days is our peace that outlasts every problem. The Ancient of Days is our peace that outlasts every problem. And the kind of big idea is very similar, right? The peace that outlasts every problem because the Ancient of Days reigns, right? We can have that peace that outlasts every problem because we know the Ancient of Days reigns. The outline that I kind of made this morning to help us give us some bones has 4 points. Isn't that crazy? Not 3 points, but 4 points about different aspects of the Ancient of Days that helps us know that we can have peace. My original outline had 7 points, my original rough draft, so you're welcome that we're not still there. 2 things to note before we dive in. One is that kind of the main purpose of this passage was that Daniel's given a vision about the future. And in that vision, right, there's something there about being prepared for what's to come. And there's something there that tells us a lot of things about who God is and some characteristics about him, like his power. That's kind of the main point of this passage. And when I talk about peace, right, that's me applying these things that we're reminded of or learning about God from this passage to a particular aspect of our lives. So that's certainly not the only thing you could take away from knowing these things about God. That's just one I'm choosing to focus on this morning. Why? Because I think recently current events have given us a lot to be anxious about. I think, and I know, but there's many of us in our church family that struggle with anxiety. And God had used kind of the book of Daniel at large, but especially this passage and even just the Ancient of Days to help me in my life to trust him in those moments of anxiety and fear. And I just want that so badly for you guys, to know God in this way, to experience and have that peace because you walk with him in that way. I haven't arrived there. I'm on this journey with you, but it's there, right? We can access this. We can have this, and I just want that for you guys as we live in an age of anxiety, right? There's all kinds of stats. According to the CDC and the American Psychiatric Association, right, 43% of adults said they were more anxious than in years previously. Young adults aged 18 to 29 are most affected, with over 1/4 saying they've struggled with anxiety symptoms over the past 2 weeks. I mentioned before the rise of AI and job insecurity and elections and political divisions and international wars, natural disasters, right? It all seems to be kind of made to induce anxiety. Now, certainly all of us wrestle, right? We're all going to wrestle with anxiety at some point in our lives. It's part of living in a certain cursed world as a sinner. But my question for us this morning is really, where do you turn when it comes? How do you deal with it? Right? How many of us, after reading the news or watching it on TV, have felt worse, not better? Right? We need a bigger picture of peace beyond just our screens. Daniel's vision gives us something rare in this age of anxiety, a picture of unshakable peace under the rule of the Ancient of Days. I mentioned before, we have 3 daughters. Our oldest is Charity, and she's 4. And like most kids her age, she doesn't want to go to bed. And one of her new tactics for not going to bed is that she will come up with something that she's afraid of that night. So if it's storming, like the go-to is I'm afraid my house is going to blow down. Sometimes, like last night, it was alligators, right? Sometimes it seems kind of random. So even though the temptation is there to be like, are you really afraid? Because she doesn't act very afraid. She's like, Daddy, I have something to tell you. I'm afraid of alligators. right before I'm about to leave. So it's a little dubious. But we take the opportunity to teach her, okay, what do you do when you are feeling afraid, even though I'm not sure you are right now, right? There's some things that you can do. And so we talk about three things. One, you can pray to God, right? Cast your cares on him. So you can talk to God about it. And two, kind of fall into the category of taking your thoughts captive. You can remind yourself of what's true. Hey, our house isn't going to blow over. Like God gave us a house that's made to withstand storms, right? There's no alligators in our house. In fact, I don't know if you've ever seen an alligator. And you can think about good things. And normally she has a really funny good things to think of, like bugs made out of ice cream or candy or something like that in her bed, right? You can do those things. So what we're talking about this morning is really more of that second and third category. There are things about God, truths about God, our God, the Ancient of Days, that help us when we feel afraid, that help us have peace that outlasts every problem. So before we dive into the passage this morning, let's just pray and ask for his help. Father, I pray that you would, as we open your word, help us to rightly understand and apply your word. Help us to, as a result of what we read, what we meditate on, what we think about, find greater peace, find greater love and respect for you. Help us to see you as the Ancient of Days. Help me to be faithful. It's a heavy task to be a preacher, to preach your word, but I also know that you give grace and you equip the called, and I just pray for that this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. So, again, hopefully you found your way to Daniel 7 by now. Like I said, we're going to start at verse 9. I'm going to summarize the first 8 verses super briefly. I don't want us to get bogged down in the vision, in the imagery, but that's really what's happening, right? Daniel's having a vision. God's giving him a vision about the future. And if you're interested in learning more about that, we covered Daniel about 2.5 years ago now. So if you're really interested in the details of the vision, you can find that on our website. I'm going to summarize just enough to help us with this morning's purpose of talking about the Ancient of Days. So, again, Daniel's having this vision. There's all this imagery about these beasts and horns. You can just think of those as kind of nations/rulers of the earth, right? So he's seeing these terrifying visions of these kind of beastly kingdoms rising up, symbolizing these violent kingdoms of the world. And if you glance kind of through those verses, you'll see these nations are not awesome, right? There's a lot of devouring, terrifying, dreadful. Kind of verse 7, especially this one, right? They're breaking into pieces. They're devouring. They're stamping what was left. Doesn't sound like a great time. These earthly kingdoms are consuming and destroying more than they're actually producing. And it's kind of setting up a contrast, right? These earthly kingdoms are replaced by one of similar character. And I think it begs the question for us as we get into our passage of where is your hope? Where is your hope? If your hope is in an earthly kingdom or an earthly ruler or really any person on earth, even a person that by earthly standards is really great, if your ultimate hope is in a person, you're going to be very disappointed. There's no person on this earth who can bear the weight of all of your hopes and dreams, and that won't let you down. Right, so there's this contrast, right? These earthly kingdoms, destruction, temporary, replaceable, and as we come to our passage, God's kingdom and God as its ruler, beautiful, producing good and forever. In ancient kingdoms, in all ancient kingdoms, the ruler would sit on his throne, kind of elevated above everyone else. And it's supposed to symbolize kind of their total authority. But Daniel's vision goes beyond earthly kings, right? The Ancient of Days, with his throne kind of blazing with fire, rules over all and throughout all time. That's the vision we come to as we come to our passage. If you would, look at verse 9. It says, "As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking, and as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed." It's a cool vision, right? It's a cool, awesome, in the actual way to use awesome, not how we normally use awesome, a truly awesome vision of the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man. If you look at verse 9, right, we come into this kind of heavenly courtroom, throne room scene. And in verse 10, and kind of verse 9 too, right, there's fire coming out of it. That's not a normal feature of throne rooms. And you hear about this multitude, right, thousands of thousands, 10,000 times 10,000. And that expression isn't like, hey, do your math, and there's exactly 100 million people there serving him, right? It's just a saying of there's an unfathomable number of God's servants there surrounding him. And sometimes, even just that imagery right there, like verses 9 and 10, could put you in a really cool spot to pray, right? I know we pray to God primarily as our Heavenly Father, and that's good. But every once in a while, we also need to be reminded that God is our all-powerful God, that the universe serves him, and maybe we need that in a moment of doubt, of where our problems need really big. Maybe we need to think about as we pray, like this is who we're praying to. This God surrounded by a countless number of servants from his fiery throne. And that's, again, as we're making this contrast between these earthly kingdoms and these heavenly kingdoms, that's kind of what brings us to our first point, right? These Ancient of Days and his kingdom is very different from earthly kingdoms. And one of those ways is the Ancient of Days is eternal. The Ancient of Days is eternal. So I can have peace about the future. Because he is eternal, I can have peace about the future. So, who is the Ancient of Days? Well, you can probably guess because the series is called Names of God. So, God, right? I think at this point I've kind of assumed it, but let's just say it. And more specifically, the Ancient of Days represents God himself as the eternal sovereign judge, whom we understand as specifically God the Father. And the Son of Man, a distinct figure, right, we mentioned in verse 13, is given all authority and dominion and power from the Ancient of Days. That points us towards Jesus. So even in the Old Testament here, we'll talk a little bit more about this at the end, but even in the Old Testament here, we're getting a little glimpse of the Trinity. Right? God the Father giving authority and dominion to the Son. That title, Ancient of Days, implies that that God himself is eternal. If you look at verse 14, right, his kingdom is everlasting. It shall not be destroyed, right? His dominion will be everlasting. He is everlasting. The title itself is symbolic of old age. If you look at verse 9, it talks about the hair of his head like pure wool, saying his hair is really white. What kind of person has white hair on their head? Old. Thank you. You're just coming out for it. You guys can say that. I don't know if I could, but you guys can say that, right? Old. He's old. Now, I don't think I'll ever make it to the white-haired stage. I think my days are numbered for having hair at all, and so I don't think that anyone will ever describe me like a head of pure wool. But the title, joking aside, the title implies more than just he's an old man, right? The Ancient of Days literally is one who's older than the days themselves, older than time itself, right? It implies a sort of existence before time itself, some timelessness. He exists outside the flow of time. He created the flow of time as we know it. He's ageless. He doesn't get old. And eternal, he has no beginning and he has no end. That's the God we serve, right? That's what I want us to see, to know God how he truly is and to act like it, right? To live our life like God is actually who he says he is. The future can be scary. Right? There's kind of unlimited questions you could ask about your future. What's my career going to look like? Will I have a family? Will I get married? What will my family look like? Will I be able to provide for my family? Will my retirement last? How will my illness turn out? Or will my loved one get better? We can go on and on, right? Truly, it could be anything. There's so many things we don't know, and yet, there's another contrast here. The Ancient of Days knows exactly what's going to happen. So we don't have to, right? I can be okay because I know the one who knows, right? I can be okay not knowing because I know the one who knows. And it's not always easy. It's not always not to know and to just trust that he knows. But that's part of where we find it. Part of where we find that peace that outlasts any circumstance or any problem. It's because the Ancient of Days reigns, and he knows. This isn't a thing to do, right? It's not a, hey, do this, and you'll feel better. It's a we're getting something, a truth about God in front of our faces and our hearts and our minds. The Ancient of Days knows the future. And he's not surprised, right? None of this is surprising to him. And he's not just, I know what's going to happen, but he's also always able to do something about it, right? He's in control. That's our second point, our second kind of characteristic of the Ancient of Days that helps us to have peace is that the Ancient of Days is sovereign. He's powerful. So I can have peace in the chaos. He's sovereign and powerful, so I can have peace in the chaos, in this chaos of life, right? The title, the name, Ancient of Days, doesn't imply just his forever, eternal timelessness, but a certain sovereignty and lordship and power. And this whole section is about how God reigns, right? In verse 9, he is seated on the throne, the special fiery throne that we've seen before, symbolic of his authority and power. In verse 12, he's able to do whatever he wants with these beasts, these nations, these leaders. Right? He takes away their dominion. He prolongs their life. Verse 13 and 14, you see the Son of Man being given by the Ancient of Days this glory and dominion and power, and that everyone's serving him. You can't give what you don't already have, right? The Ancient of Days is sovereign and powerful over all. So when you hear about conflict around the world, wars in the Middle East, in Ukraine, God's sovereignty says no matter what the nations do, he's in control. He's in control of world history. Kingdoms rise and fall under his authority. No economy, no inflation or job loss or housing costs or market crash or threat of recession can overthrow God's plan to provide for his people. Right? Even the most unexpected diagnosis is under his rule. He determines our days, and he's able to care for his people through every trial. There's nothing outside of his power to heal. And whether it's a flood in Texas or wildfires in Canada or tornado warnings or watches in Wisconsin, right? Creation itself is subject to God. Maybe raising children and wondering how they turn out, or you think about loved ones who don't know the Lord, who are not believing, and just knowing that because he's the Ancient of Days, no one is out of his reach. And in general, the decisions of life that are so often hard and confusing, and it's difficult to know which direction to go, we can move forward in confidence. Why? Because we know we're not strong enough to mess up his plan. We're not strong enough to mess up the Ancient of Days. And he can guide our steps. Our Jonah study just began this past week on Tuesday, and it was a good time. So shout out to my Jonah study peeps, my Joe Stowe. That no one says that, but it just came to me. So my Joe Stowe peeps. One of the we had a lot of great applications from our study of Jonah. One of them that we did talk about, right, was the story of Jonah is him running the opposite direction of God's plan for his life, and yet even running the total opposite direction can't mess up the plans of a sovereign God. And instead, God uses that to do a work in Jonah's heart. And that's the same for us. The Ancient of Days is a name of power and strength. He can't be overwhelmed, right? He's not overwhelmable. There's nothing more powerful than him. So when you feel overwhelmed, you can have peace knowing that the Ancient of Days isn't. Right? There's never been a time that God has felt overwhelmed, whether it's the big things of life or those kind of day-to-day things. Right? For me, it was putting all three girls to bed by myself, and there's like chores waiting for me after putting all three girls to bed, because my wife Michelle does city youth. She has a heart for middle schoolers, which is a beautiful and rare thing. So we got to do everything we can to get her in front of those middle schoolers, right? Right. So that left me home with the three girls, and I just felt like the word overstimulated we use a lot now in our society, right? I felt overstimulated in that moment, right? Where can I find my grace and strength and peace in that moment of parenting, right? In those day-to-day moments. Or I mentioned God had really used the book of Daniel and this in my life previously. In undergrad of college, especially senior year, I just went through the season of work was really, really hard, and it just kind of put me in the lane of like, if you lived in any of the 3 residence halls that I had some leadership over, and you were ever in the hospital, for whatever reason, you would have some sort of interactions and follow-up with me afterwards, which in retrospect, like, I don't know why they put that on a college student, but here we are. Right, that was heavy for me. And then, just a shift in friendships, and one friend in particular really struggling with suicidal thoughts and anxiety like this, and just continuing to see him go to a worse and a worse spot, and feeling like very powerless and very hopeless of like, I'm doing everything I know, and clearly he's getting worse and worse. Where do you find strength in those moments, right? Of like total powerlessness, you care, and caring makes it harder for you. Like where do you go? And it's not I find it within myself, right? Where do I find the strength and the peace in that moment? It's not in me. It's in the Ancient of Days. And that's where I found it there too, in those moments, and in college, and just the day-to-day stuff, whether it's ministry or parenting. It's in if I have a problem way bigger than myself, I know someone who's way bigger than myself, right? There's a God-sized problem, and it has a God-sized solution, right? Do you believe the Ancient of Days is big enough for your problems? Is he big enough for your challenges? Or, if you're honest, in your mind or in your heart, are your problems greater than the Ancient of Days? God's sovereign power says, even when I'm not in control, I can know the one who is, and I can be faithful and trust. And that's one of the ways we have peace that outlasts our circumstances, because the Ancient of Days reigns. Let's back up to verse 10, and then I want to read to the end of kind of what we're going to talk about this morning, which is verse 22. A stream of fire issued and came out from him, and 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking, and as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. So again, don't get too bogged into this. We just need to know it for the conclusion. These four great beasts are four kings who shall rise out of the earth, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever, and ever. Then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, and with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. Again, not a great kingdom, not a great ruler. And about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up before, which 3 of them fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. Here's the important bit right here. And as I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. Right? It seemed like he was winning until the Ancient of Days came. And judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Here's more good news. Right? The Ancient of Days doesn't just know. He doesn't just have the power to change, but he loves justice. He is just, and he's going to act. And we can act and live knowing that one day he's going to set all things right. That's our third point. The Ancient of Days is just, so I can have peace when injustice seems to win. Right? When things seem unjust, I can have peace knowing that the Ancient of Days is just. All right, verse 10, his court sits in judgment. Right? The books are opened, not closed. In verse 11 to 12 again, these nations, these rulers are judged and destroyed, and dominion is taken away. And that kind of climax of the passage that we're looking at this morning that I pointed out, this verse 21 to 22, it seems like the saints are going to be prevailed over, that evil has won, until the right time that the Ancient of Days comes, right? And then judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, right? He doesn't just sit by and watch, right? He comes and judgment is for the saints in his timing. So I can have peace when injustice seems to win. I don't know if you ever heard the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a German pastor during World War II. He was one of the more outspoken Christians against Hitler and the Nazis and all the terrible things that were going on at that time. Eventually leading to him getting arrested and being sent to a concentration camp. And while he was in prison, he was encouraging others with his faith, even knowing that his faith and living out his faith might be the thing that costs him his life. And eventually it did. Just a few weeks before the war ended, he was executed. But even in those final days, right, from all that we can tell, it seems like he had peace. How can that be? It's not because he felt like his circumstances were about to change, right? And his circumstances were truly horrible. It's because he trusted that God was going to bring ultimate justice. If not in this life, then in eternity, or in the end of all things. Right? That's the peace in the midst of injustice. That's the kind of peace that we can have too. Right? In the big things of life, the systematic oppression, the racism, the wars, right? These really big, obviously God-sized problems. We need an Ancient of Days. We need the Ancient of Days. Right? We can, of course, we don't just ignore those things, right? But we can be faithful and find peace knowing that the Ancient of Days loves justice and will act. God's kingdom won't have those things, right? There will be no oppression, there will be no racism, there will be no wars, there won't even be sadness. But I think this applies to the day-to-day stuff too, right? Because of my faith in some way, shape, or form, my life has been made harder or been unpopular. Or just a general kind of mistreatment for doing the right thing, or missing out on something because you chose to do the right thing. The big one I thought of, and this was a conversation I had with someone from our church family just this week, of like, if someone, and I think all of us have felt this at one point, someone, maybe a loved one, maybe a family member, maybe a friend, wrongs you, sins against you, and never repents, never asks for forgiveness, and yet you, trying to do the right thing, right, are at peace with them and made peace with it as much as possible in your heart. And yet you're still left with the consequences and maybe some pain of what someone else has done. Right? You're suffering innocently. That's an injustice. What helps you to have peace in the midst of an injustice like that? It won't make it all perfect right now. It won't take all the pain away, but knowing that the Ancient of Days will one day make all things right can be a source of peace for us even then. Right? We can have hope because we look to the day where the Ancient of Days does make all things right. But as we wait, knowing He will can give us a confident peace beyond our circumstances or beyond the injustice that we see before us. An ultimate confidence not just built on the Ancient of Days and His fiery throne, but one that has its ultimate foundation in the one that the Ancient of Days gave all authority and dominion to, the Son of Man. Let me just read 13 and 14 real quick. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Again, here's that glimpse of the Trinity, this interaction between the Father and the Son. It might be difficult to tell that the Son of Man was Jesus if you just had Daniel, but we don't, right? We have the benefit of the New Testament. And this is one of Jesus' favorite things, or favorite ways to talk about himself as the Son of Man. Let me just give you one example from John 3. It says, "No one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man." Right? Jesus came as a baby. "And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up." Right? Jesus had to be lifted up on the cross for us. I'll just go on to verse 15 real quick. I know it's not up there. "That whoever believes in him may have eternal life." And then, of course, right after that is one of the most famous verses, John 3:16. Right? Jesus is talking in this passage, identifying himself as the Son of Man. In this passage, he's referring to Daniel 7. He comes in verse 13 to the Ancient of Days, to the Father, presented before him, and in verse 14, he receives that eternal wisdom and power and glory and dominion from the Father, and this kingdom, and that all should serve him. I hope that gets you excited. Right? I hope the eternity of serving Jesus is something you're excited about, and if it doesn't, ask God to change your heart. Like, I don't know exactly what heaven is like, but I'm confident that's a big part of it, is serving Jesus forever. The reason we can have peace in the Ancient of Days and in this fiery throne is because we know our justification is secure in the faithfulness of Christ, right? Because he was perfect, because he came down, and because he was lifted up, because he suffered for our sake, because he took that penalty that we deserved. That's why knowing God is powerful and just and knows all is good news, because we have this way that we can get right with him. Without all that, this would actually be kind of terrible news. Right? Daniel, I'm sure, had faith, but even just witnessing these visions, in verse 15, right, he was anxious and alarmed. Right? It's a terrible thing to just behold the unfiltered glory of God. I'm sure we're going to see Daniel in heaven. I'm sure he had faith. That's another sermon for another time. But he was just kind of in the first person beholding him. Right? He wasn't experiencing the wrath of God. It's truly terrifying to be the object of God's wrath. And I want you guys to have the peace of knowing that you're not. Right? And if you don't know Jesus, that you would choose today to put your faith in him. Right? You can do that right now. You can be justified. You can have that covering. You can have that peace by trusting in what Jesus did for you. Most of us here have done that, but don't have that peace because how we live, how we think about God in our day-to-day, we're not walking closely with him in this way. You're running to other things in those moments of anxiety or fear. Before I pray us out, I just want to kind of challenge us. Let's run to God in those moments of fear, in those moments of anxiety. Let's run to the Ancient of Days. Right? He knows the future. He knows what's coming, and he has the power to do something about it. And one day he's going to make everything right. So I invite the worship team to come up now. I want to just take like 2 minutes right where we're at. I think all of us have at least one thing that can make us worry, or can make us anxious, or can make us fearful. Maybe it's a new thing. Maybe it's been ongoing for a long time. Maybe it's something that kind of comes and goes, but I think we all have this thing. Let's just name one kind of significant thing in your life and just bring it before the throne of the Ancient of Days. So again, let's just take like 2 minutes. Just pray where you are. Just have that moment with God. Tell him about, that one thing. And just ask him to trust and help you to have trust and peace in the midst of that thing. Ask you for his help. And I'll have the worship team kind of noodle, and I'll pray up here. And then, in a couple minutes, I'll close our time in prayer.